Hello and welcome to the first video of a programming tutorial where we are going to be building a game inside of Pygame. Now let's start by just checking where we can find everything, and then I'll explain more about our actual project we'll be doing here. So Pygame can be found here, and I'll post all of these links in the description so you guys have easy access to them. And Pygame is a package or module for Python that allows us to do a lot of stuff using it. It handles a lot of stuff for us regarding game development. So it'll handle a lot of the window actions, as well as it'll handle drawing for us, and it has an event system that we can utilize to get mouse position, whether something's been clicked, and basically it takes care of a lot of stuff for us when we're programming a game. So we can focus more on the game and less about little nuances trying to, make a box appear red or something. So it'll handle a lot of stuff for us, and that's pretty much its biggest purpose, really. So the version I'm using, just for comparison, if anything's different or strange for you compared to what I do, then I'm using this version right here, which is Pygame 192A0 Windows 32-bit edition for Python 2.7. This is the one I'm using. If you want to use a different one, that's perfectly fine. Just make sure that if you're using a 64-bit version of Python, you need to use a 64-bit version of Pygame, or if you're using 32-bit Python, you need 32-bit Pygame. Keep that in mind. They are incompatible otherwise. And if you do use a 64-bit version, there's a link down here that you can check out, this bottom line, that tells you about that. So, also, before I forget, there's more than just Windows downloads. If you keep scrolling down, you'll find Unix, Mac, and a bunch of others. So, we're going to come back here mostly because we want documentation. If you look over the top left, you'll see right here there's documentation. I'm actually going to click on this because we're probably going to use this page a little bit, because I'm going to click on things, like Pygame, for example, and I'm just going to point out these things, maybe click on one, and show you, how much information you get, because the documentation for Pygame is really good. Like, if you're ever stuck on something, just visit these, look for something you're trying to do, and then click around and see if you find what you're looking for. Now, just for completeness of all the download locations, we have Python here. I am using Python 32-bit edition 2.7.11. This is the version I'm using, literally this button here. If you're using 64-bit version, then you actually have to scroll down because these two buttons by default are downloading 32-bit versions. So if you want your 64-bit version, you just have to look down here and you will be able to find it. I'm using Python 2.7 instead of 3. Branch, the 3.x branch, simply because Python 2.7 is more compatible with Pygame in the regards of multiple operating systems. Like Macintosh only has Python 2.7 available for Pygame, so that's one reason I'm using it. It's just more compatible around the board, even though there's probably very little difference between the two. And of course, the IDE that you've been able to see in the background that we were already in is going to be PyCharm. Of course, all three of these links are going to be in the description, so you guys can find them easily. Now that we're done with that, we can actually get started with programming. So, I just want to point out, we have 3 files in our project, and normally you won't have a project here. So what you'll probably have to do is hit File, say New Project, select your version of Python, which is odd that it tells me it's 2.7.10 when I don't have that version installed. It's 2.7.11. That's the one on my computer. Of course, you would name your project here where it's untitled. I already have a project, so I don't need to make one. But I do want to make a new file, so I'm going to right click on the Pygame tutorial, which is my project name here, and just say new Python file. And I'm just going to call this _ main. And this is going to be my main programming file. This is where we're going to actually do all of the tutorial stuff, all the stuff that I write on camera, so you guys can see it. Now, the example testing, this is where I'm just going to kind of show off small examples of things, probably having to do with either Python or Pygame, just to conceptually, so you guys can kind of see it run in the console, and then I might implement it into the game. Pre-video example is something I'm going to do before each video, where it's just a small example of what we're looking to do in the video. So I'm actually going to run this one. So let's see, run this, and you're going to see this is what we're going to end up doing. We're just going to create a window that, runs. We can move it around. It has a name, which I've called it Game Tutorial. And there are 3 boxes, a red one that's filled, green one that's filled, and then a red one that's like an outline. This is what we hope to accomplish by the end of this video. And of course, when we come over here, we can close out easily. Now that's actually funny, the closing out thing, and I'll talk about that when we get to it. But you actually have to state that that needs to happen. It doesn't automatically happen when you make a window. And then pre-testing, that is a whole slew of code, really bad, unorganized code that I'm not even going to show. And that's just me testing concepts of what direction I want this game to go kind of before I actually create my pre-video example, so it's like way ahead, and it has a little outline of a game, but like I said, we're not going to take a look at that. So let's actually focus on the part we're going to be programming. So with Pygame, the first thing you need to do is you need to import it, and you just say import Pygame, because Pygame is an external module that we are going to be using. And it doesn't come in Python by itself, so you import it, and then you actually have to activate it. So what you say is you go pygame.init, so initialize Pygame. This means we're going to start Pygame to be working, and we're going to be allowed to start using things from it, like Pygame, pygame.display, which is one thing that we can use from it, which actually sets our window. But I want to point this out now because generally I forget this. You actually have to close out Pygame before you close out Python. So at the end of your code, you probably want something called pygame.quit. And it's this version of quit, lowercase quit with the parentheses. This will cause Pygame to shut down. So basically what we're saying is start Pygame, and then, we do all of our code in here, do stuff in here. And then at the very end, when we close the game, when the player hits quit or clicks on that X at the top left, then it quits out and this gets called, which shuts down Pygame. Otherwise, Pygame will actually just kind of leak memory. It'll still be running even though you've shut down your Python interpreter, and it'll just kind of use a little tiny bit of RAM every time. So if we keep, running our example here and we don't close out of Pygame, Pygame will still technically be running somewhere. So we just want to make sure it's nice and clean, so we're going to quit. And then I'm also just going to call quit because this will shut down the game itself after we've called pygame.quit, and that will close our window. So when we actually push this little X, everything will get closed. So do stuff. What is the first thing we do? Well, we're quitting out of Pygame and we're quitting out of a window we don't currently have. So how about we make that? Now I'm going to call this game window. And I'm going to set this equal to, which means we're just creating a variable called game window, and we're going to set it equal to something. Well, what is it equal? It's going to be equal to a pygame.display.set_mode. What this is this sets the display mode. So what do we want? Well, we're just going to give it a pixel argument. So we're going to put a tuple in, which means another set of parentheses, and we need to give it some X size and Y size. For this example, I think I'm going to go with 1,000 pixels wide and, 600 pixels tall. That sounds pretty good. That should work. And actually, let's run this, see what happens now that we have a display. I want to show you guys. See, a window pops up and then goes away. Well, that's not quite what our example had. Our example had a window that stayed. So how are we going to get it to stay? Well, you have to basically trap this thing in a loop. So we would have something called, some kind of game loop. So we would say while, game is active, this is my game loop. And basically what's in here is everything that is going to run inside of the game. So we actually need to put some kind of argument in here. I'm just going to say pass. Now pass is kind of a cheaty Python thing that you can say for when you're doing loops, where you can just say, you know what, if this is the case, just pass, which means don't do anything. Because if you leave that out, it'll actually throw an error. But right now, the reason it's throwing an error is we don't have anything called game active. So let's set that up real quick. Game active, we're just going to make this equal to a bool, and it's going to be true. So basically what we're saying is game active is true when the game starts. So game starts somewhere up here, and then game active becomes true, and then we say while game active, which means now we're trapped inside of this loop. So all it's going to do is interpret a comment that's meaningless, and then it's going to pass, and it's going to loop again, and it's going to pass, and it's going to loop again, and it's going to pass. So this is a bad loop. It's an infinite loop that'll never end because there's no escape. So what do we want to do inside of our game? Well, there's really only one thing we have to do for Pygame to be able to really run, and that's talk to the event handler or the event system. So while the game is active, we're just going to start grabbing events. We're going to say for event in pygame.event.get, which is going to get us a huge list of all of the events, basically a giant array of events that are happening. And what do we want to do with it? Well, I'm just going to actually print the event for now, because I want to show you guys what is happening with these events. So currently we're still not able to quit. Luckily we have a stop button over here that'll let us actually shut down this once we started it. So let's run it. Now you're going to notice we have a black window and our console at the bottom is getting spammed with a lot of stuff. So look down here. Active event state. This means we basically left the window. Mouse motion. Let me click. We can see mouse button down, mouse button up. How about I push the space bar, maybe some keys on the keyboard. You guys can see key up, key down, key down, key up. More clicking, more movement. These are all of the events that we're getting from Pygame. So this is basically the event system. All of these events, we're just going through them and printing them whenever they happen. This is the stuff we can grab onto. So, if we wanted to move the arrow keys, right now, key up, I'm clicking the 4 arrow keys. Up, left, down, right. And those give us a little key code, and we can actually get those. So, if we want our character to run around the map, then we just, wait for the event system, say, hey, when you get, these keys, do stuff. Now, here's the thing I was talking about with the X button. Okay. It looks like we called an event 12 quit. The window's still here. I'm clicking this X button. Nothing's happening. Well, you can't close out of this window unless you tell it to actually quit. So pygame.quit and quit will quit out, but pushing the X doesn't actually quit. It just throws an event called quit. So like I said, we have to come over here to this stop button right here on the console, and that's actually going to shut down the program so we can get rid of it. So we know there's an event called quit. So let's create an if statement. Now, I know if you're new to programming, you don't know what while loops, for loops, or if statements are, but when we actually program some and the first time we really use them, I'll talk about them, but right now we're just kind of getting the bare bones of what Pygame needs to kind of be effective and run. So I'm going to say if the event.type equals pygame.quit, all caps for this one, QUIT are all capitalized, then what are we going to do? This basically means if the event is quit, which is when we push the X button, what do we want to do? Well, we just want to say game active equals false. Because what this is going to do is when this while loop runs, we're going to say while game active, well, it's true. Then we're going to grab the events. We're going to say if any of those events are quit, set game active to false. And when the while loop comes back up here, it's going to go, this is false. I'm going to drop out of the loop. I'm going to quit Pygame, and I'm going to quit. Let's take a look at this. So now we have the same thing. We're still getting spammed with stuff. We can click all the buttons we want. We get all these mouse motion, mouse button up, mouse button downs. But now when we click this, we're going to actually quit out. And it's going to say process finished with exit code 0. That means it's just a manual quit. Sometimes the process can quit out from fatal errors. We're going to hopefully avoid any of those completely crashing it. But if you get this, everything worked out. So I'm going to leave it at that. We don't need this print spam anymore. I'll leave it because we'll probably use it later, so I'll just comment it out. Comments in Python are used by using the hash, and then whatever comes after the hash on the line is a comment. There's another way to do comments, which I believe is like triple quote marks. So you use 3 and then you go comment or something, and then you use 3 more. Yeah, that's a comment. And this one is actually a multi-line comment, so we can do this. Comments, multi-line. Cool stuff. So there's a couple different forms of using comments for Python. So this is one. Of course, the hash is the other one. And whenever it finds a hash, the interpreter, the compiler, it'll just ignore this line. So now if we run this, I'll just do it real quick. We won't get spammed with all that stuff. So you can see I'm clicking again, moving the mouse around, and we're not getting spam because we just commented it out. That's a good way for trying to test things. Comment out one line that might not be working, and then if the program works again, then you definitely know it's that line. But we'll see all this stuff. Alright, I just want to quickly clean up some of this. We don't need any of these comments really. I'll leave that, like I said. Let's see. Between this and the example, we have a couple more things I want to do. So we wanted to set the caption. Because if you notice, let's see, pre-video example, let's run this. If you notice, this one said game tutorial. Whereas this one, which is the one we've been working on, just says Pygame window. We want to actually change that. And how you do that is you say pygame.display.set caption to whatever we put in here. So we can say, Pygame tutorial. And now when we run it, it should be set to that string. And of course, you can put any string in there. See, Pygame tutorial. So now it's all working. And of course, this will take any string, so any text you want, you can just, mash a bunch of keys and get a solid name, solid style name for your window. That's completely optional, but it'll work since it's a string, as long as it's between two quote marks that are matching. They don't actually have to be double quotes either. You can use single quotes. There's no real difference between strings as long as that they match. So with Python, as long as you're matching them, there's no problem. But if you see I have one single quote and then a double quote, it doesn't understand this is a string. However, now it does. So we can use single quotes or double quotes. It doesn't really matter. It's just always been my preference to use single quotes for like characters, and then double quotes or single quotes maybe for words as well. But if there's ever a space, I tend to like double quotes. I'm not sure why. That's my preference. So let's see. Now we have our window. We have it named. We just have to draw some stuff. Now there are two ways we can draw in Python, or Pygame I should say. And both of those ways are quite a bit different from each other. It kind of depends on what you want, really. So let's go outside of the event statement and say, this is where stuff happens. Because this is basically where everything goes down. And then I'm actually going to put another one and say this is where stuff ends. And this will just kind of give us an idea that everything inside of here is basically free to work on. Now let's talk about the first method of drawing shapes. And I'm just going to draw rectangles for this. I'm not going to draw any ellipses or circles or polygons even. I'm just going to draw rectangles for now because they're the simplest. So the first method of drawing these is saying pygame.draw.rect, and then of course you'd have to fill out this argument. The second way is saying something like, this is a variable name, so you can name this anything. I'm just going to call it surf, for short for surface, equals a pygame.surface. And then of course you would fill out the parentheses, the arguments. Let's start with the rectangle because it has a little bit difference with it, and it can be used for something that the surface can't be used for. So what does the rectangle take? Well, it takes whatever it's going to draw on, so it takes some kind of surface to draw on. It takes the color of the rectangle, and then it actually takes a rectangle, which is the, start XY and then the end XY location, and then it takes something like a line width. So these are basically the arguments that it's going to take. So let's just start with surface. Surface is what it's drawing onto. So we want to draw this thing onto the game window, which is a surface itself. So we're going to draw the rectangle to the game window. That means when our window shows up, it'll appear there. What color do we want? I'm going to use a red rectangle. So we're going to use a tuple, and we're going to use 255, 0, and 0. A tuple is just basically anything between two parentheses. It can even be a single value, but we're going to use this 3 RGB value, which is why there are 3 in here, and the Python or Pygame will understand this is a color. So the rectangle. This takes another tuple, except this one takes some x, some y, some width, and some height. These are the 4 arguments of the rectangle. So where do we want to draw this thing? Well, this is in pixels, so we're going to draw it at 100, 100. We're going to make it a perfect square by making it 100 wide and 100 tall. And then width. what is the width? Well, this is how thick the lines are. So I'm going to draw this with a width of 5. And I'm actually going to copy this line entirely, and we're going to paste it a second one down here, but we're not going to put a width in. So we're going to take out the width, and we're going to reposition it to be a little bit lower on the y-axis so you can see both of them. So this one is drawing with a fill, or a width of 5, so the line will be 5, and this one will draw without a width at all. So let's run this. Alright, Pygame's just complaining about my surface. So let's take a look at this. Nothing's here. Why not? Well, that's because basically when you're talking about running a game, we're just running this in a loop, but we're not really telling the window to do anything. So if you think about motion and frames, basically all motion is just kind of pictures changing slightly and then being displayed to you really quickly. So when you talk about 30 frames per second, it just means there are 30 pictures that you are seeing each second that are slightly different, and it looks like it's motion. That's really what it is. So we're actually going to have to change this up a little bit. So we just have to add one thing really, and that's an update. So if we say pygame.display.update with a couple parentheses but no argument, this will update the entire screen. It's identical to this function, which is called pygame.display.flip, flip with a P, and this just displays, this updates the entire screen. This updates the entire screen. The difference is that update actually allows you to put it in a rectangle, much like, say, this number right here, this value. Put in some kind of rectangle, and it will only update that rectangle. If you leave it blank, it updates the entire screen. Let's run it now. Now you're going to notice we have two rectangles. Okay, why is one hollow and the other one full? Well, that's because one of them has a width of 5, which means these lines are 5 pixels in width, and the other one, which is this one right here, has no width, which means it automatically fills the rectangle. So it just completely fills it. And if we actually take this and make it, 15 and then run this again, then you will see this one's much thicker now. So now the lines are much thicker, and if you don't add one, it fills it. Now, the rectangle, the pygame.draw.rect, is only really good if you want to use this style, the first style here, because you can use a surface to do this exact same thing where you fill the rectangle, except it can be hardware accelerated, so it can be faster. So let's actually look at the surface one now. So I'm going to uncomment our surface so we can start using it. Now the surface takes a tuple of its size. So I'm going to call this thing 150 by 75. And now we have a surface. But the surface is it's completely blank. It doesn't have anything unique to it. So we're going to call the surface, which is our variable name, and we're going to say fill it. And what are we going to fill it with? Well, it's a color. So what kind of color do we want it to be? Well, I want this one to be, let's go with, how about green? So 0, 255, 0. We'll define some colors later, but for now we're just going to be using tuples, which we've already been using. So we're going to fill it with green. Now, this is the same thing. We've created our surface. It has no location currently, and it has just its width and its height. So what we still need to do is we still need to give it somewhere to draw, which is some kind of surface to draw onto, and we need to give it some starting location. Because automatically it fills, which means we don't actually get a width argument to go with it. So how do we do that? Well, we actually call the game window for this. So we say game window.blit. And what blit is blit takes some type of surface and a location. And what it does is game window, basically we say game window, draw this thing here. So draw this surface at this location. That's basically what it means. What are we drawing for a surface? Well, that would be surf, which is our 150 pixel wide by 75 pixel tall green box or rectangle. and where do we want to draw it. Let's draw it at 500. Actually, this is a tuple. So again, we have to use the parentheses. We're going to draw this at 500 pixels on the x-axis by, let's go with 200. So now, when we run this, you'll notice we have another green box that looks the same type. It's the same type of rectangle as the red one, except the surfaces can be hardware accelerated, so drawing it can be a little bit faster. My personal preference is to use surfaces when I just want a filled color. However, like I said, the rectangles are good because they automatically handle these outlines, where you can see that it automatically doesn't draw the center, basically. It draws 4 lines that create a rectangle. Now, I do want to point out one last thing. This is at 500, 200. Let's do something neat. Let's put the one with the width at 500, 200, basically the empty box, and let's run it. So this is actually better if we move this one. So let's take our rectangle, and I actually needed to move this below because I need to draw after the surface, just to kind of show this to you. So things draw in order and on layer. So basically what this means is when we draw our 3 different rectangles, we're drawing this one first, we're drawing this one second, and then we're drawing this one third. This one's on the bottom, this one's in the middle, this one's on top, meaning this one will cover up everything else if we were drawing them on top of each other. However, the thing about the rectangle, when you give it a fill, or when you give it a width and it doesn't automatically fill, you'll notice it doesn't even draw the center. It's not like it's drawing the center as the same color as the background. It's just not drawing the center, which means you can use this thing for outlines and stuff, where you don't actually have to worry about the center, ignoring it basically. It just is completely non-existent. And that's a nice thing to know, just because that lets you draw kind of the border without having to worry about the center, whereas these things, the center is all colored in. And on a final note about this, the drawing the rectangle with a thickness is not the same thing as drawing this and then drawing a smaller box inside of it. This is literally drawing 4 lines that connect to each other to create a rectangle. So this is all that we're going to be doing for this video. What we're going to work on next time is actually moving some of these rectangles so you guys can get a better feel of, actual game here. Because right now, we're just drawing stuff. We're not actually moving anything. We're not, having any fun click events. We're just creating a window, drawing a few rectangles to it, and then, quitting out. And that's pretty much, that is all we're doing. So yeah, next time we'll focus on moving these objects and just kind of seeing a little bit more about this update here. And one more thing we have to do before our update is, fully working, because we have to understand when we draw something and then we move it and we draw it again, the old image doesn't actually go away. Anyhow, thank you for watching. Hopefully I'll see you next time.